Welcome to the Well Woman Show. Each episode is a transformational journey using mindfulness, feminism, leadership, and strategy to support you to thrive personally, generate wealth, and impact your community.
It's often assumed that I'm looking at this biology through the lens of a feminist, and I don't always think of it that way. I think I see these differences, and these differences are truths to me, and I think we do need to discuss them. And over time, I have found that I then use that to promote better understanding, of both women, but also men's health. But I also use this as a platform to promote women in science, women in STEM. And I've watched myself morph more and more into a feminist.
And now, here's your host, feminist thought leader, London School of Economics grad, leadership consultant, and transformational coach, Giovanna Rossi.
Hello, well women. You've likely been overwhelmed, like me, anxious and downright scared. I've also been all of these things, and also I've been joyful and mindful and happy too. On the tough days, I've questioned everything, my life, my purpose, and my worth. And on the good days, I've produced podcasts, interviewed global health scientists, like the interview you're going to hear today on the show, and I've been published in Forbes. It's a serious roller coaster. But you know what keeps me grounded? This, you, and my deep knowing that women are the backbone of the future economy. Not just any women, but you, listening to this show, us. Together, we're going to create the foundation for the next generations to thrive. Are you with me? But first, let's get one thing straight. I need you to be fully present and alive and thriving, not necessarily in the produce crash cycle that the world is used to. No, I mean really thriving on your terms, with your creativity and your voice. So what I've been thinking about doing is really thinking about how do we dive into our next chapter, the next version of our lives and our relationships and our work. And so I've actually put together a short program that's a group program. I don't do many group programs. I do a lot of one-on-one, but I wanted to offer this as an affordable way for people to really engage and benefit from this community and my coaching. So I've put this together. You can go to wellwomanlife.com/yournextchapter. So wellwomanlife.com/yournextchapter, I believe. And you can take a look there and get signed up. It starts on April 27th. So if you're listening to this as this is publishing, it's around mid-April. You've got a few more days to sign up. It is a limited group that we're doing this time because I want it to be really intimate. So if you're interested, definitely head over there and take a look. And I'm excited to let you know that on the show this week, it's part 2 of a series I'm doing on the impact of sex and gender on health outcomes. Today, I have another episode on the COVID-19 research that came out a couple weeks ago. And I talked to Sabra Kline, PhD, a researcher and professor at John Hopkins University, whose research is focused on uncovering the mechanisms mediating how males and females differ in their immune responses to viral infection and vaccination. It's a fascinating conversation. On the show, we talk about the lack of gender-specific data for COVID-19 patients, how hormones play a role in the COVID-19 outbreak, and how important it is to shine a light on male and female differences and the benefits we could have moving forward. So all the information shared today can be found at the show notes at wellwomanlife.com/198show. You can also continue the conversation with us in the Well Woman Life community group at wellwomanlife.com/Facebook. This show is thankful for support from Natural Awakenings magazine in New Mexico and High Desert Yoga in Albuquerque. I'm speaking with Professor Sabra Kline on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Giovanna.
Professor Klein, I want to just start by asking you, we're in such an interesting time, obviously, in the world right now. And recently there was a New England Journal of Medicine study that came out in February They studied 1,099 patients in China with COVID-19. And the results were pretty interesting in terms of outcomes, the differences between men and women. And I'd love to know, what are you working on in terms of this kind of information? And what are the challenges right now?
Absolutely. So, the paper that you're referring to is it's a wonderful starting point for us about the situation that emerged out of China and then has been replicated in Italy, Spain, France, Germany, Switzerland, the UK, and now in preliminary reports in the United States, in which during the current pandemic, so we are in the midst of our 100-year pandemic, that awful viral pandemic that seems to occur every 100 or so years. And during this pandemic, what we're seeing is that while numbers of cases seem to be equal between men and women, suggesting that men and women are equally likely to be exposed to the virus and to test positive for the virus, which in this case is SARS-CoV-2, men are suffering significantly worse outcomes, both in terms of requiring intensive care unit hospitalization, so ICU hospitalization, as well as mortality. We are consistently across countries seeing this male bias. While this is greatest among older aged individuals, so individuals 60 years and older, where countries have been partitioning and looking at the differences between males and females across diverse age groups, we're seeing this difference in age groups as young as 30 years of age. We just tend to have fewer severe cases in those younger adult age groups. So, it makes it a little bit more difficult to confirm these types of findings. But definitely we are seeing that it's men suffering worse outcomes, more severe disease.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about, I would like to talk about the data, but also about kind of the reasons we're seeing this. But
Absolutely.
First, on the data side, I understand that we have sex disaggregated data from some countries, but not all countries. Can you talk about where we are with getting access to that data in the U.S.?
Absolutely. So, Giovanna, I would hope that here we are in the year 2020. This would not be such a difficult bit of data to obtain. And in the United States, we are typically not very good at disaggregating and analyzing data to compare males and females. As you're seeing in most of the outlets, we are just getting total numbers of cases. We are getting total numbers of hospitalizations. We're getting total numbers of deaths. This is sometimes broken down by age and then occasionally broken down by sex. But when they do break it down by sex, they collapse across all ages from 0 to 99 and older. And that's where I think there's a problem in the United States, because disaggregating, or, for your listeners, all that means is partitioning your data based on whether these cases are men, whether these cases are women, and then doing a further breakdown by our age so that you can then compare men and women at distinct ages. So you could compare males and females among children, so prior to puberty. You could compare men and women after puberty in the early stages of adulthood, and then in different age ranges as we move through the adult life course. We don't do that in the United States, but many of our European counterparts, as well as China, as well as the UK, have done just that, which is how we've been able to make this very consistent observation that both older age and being male are risk factors for more severe outcomes. But I can't really tell you if we're seeing that same interaction, that same combination of age and sex driving what we're seeing in the United States, because we do not disaggregate, as you said, our data to allow for that evaluation to occur.
Okay, and I have to say this is not a surprise. We have known for many years that this is a problem in looking at all kinds of things in health and public health.
Yes.
But right now it's particularly distressing because it could actually really help us to know this. And so who keeps that data? Who's the keeper of that? Is it
the keeper of the data? This is about our U.S. Centers for Disease Control, and they likely have these data, but this just is not how these data get reported. Another complication in the United States is that each state is doing their own reporting. So, for example, I monitor very closely the situation in New York. As you know, at least as of today, April 2nd, while we're doing this interview, New York has remained an epicenter where we have a majority of both cases, but also deaths from COVID-19. And they are not doing this type of disaggregation.
So, Professor Klein, how would knowing the data, how would that help us plan for critical care capacity and care, like caring for people as they get
COVID? So maybe before you and I talk about how we care, what I think this disaggregation does is it points to who are our greatest at-risk populations, which in this very moment where, as you know, we're all practicing social distancing, and part of why that is the recommendation is because we do not have a known antiviral. We do not yet have a vaccine. These things will be coming, but today we do not have these. So our public health behaviors become what are most important. So I think by disaggregating and knowing that being older as well as being male are risk factors for more severe outcome from this viral infection, I think that could inform public health messaging, because once we know the at-risk groups, we know how to target those groups with our messaging to ensure that they're getting the message to stay home, to wash their hands, to practice social distancing, and that maybe it becomes all the more important if you know that you are at greater risk actually from dying from this virus.
But can I ask you real quick before
Absolutely.
we move on, in terms of the data, are we also, and I am very interested in, but are you also looking at intersectional data analysis? So really looking, I know you mentioned age, but are you also interested in looking at race, ethnicity, geography?
Oh, I love it. Yes.
Obviously, so many other things to look at.
There really are. And I love that you used that word, intersectionality. I have a wonderful collaborator and colleague at Johns Hopkins. Her name is Rosemary Morgan. And as a social scientist, she studies a lot of this intersectionality. And for me as a biologist, it's always important for me to hear and know that much of our biology, and maybe even by biology, I mean our ability to mount an appropriate immune response, to hopefully appropriately control the virus, clear the virus, without having that immune response get so high that it actually contributes to damage to our own bodies, that there can be intersection of these biological processes with our gender. So some of the social or cultural norms that define us as being, what is appropriate for being man or being a woman. Or you brought up race, socioeconomic status. I think all of these factors can in turn intersect with our biology and our biological responses to these viruses. And one of the ways that I think some of the factors that you mentioned and that I added on to could intersect with our biology is through what we often refer to as comorbidities. And you've probably seen some of the data coming out for COVID-19 indicating that several comorbidities, which by definition, these are just other illnesses that are associated, in this case, with greater risk of severe outcome from COVID-19. So we're hearing about, for example, cardiovascular disease. We're hearing about smoking. We're hearing about pulmonary disease. There have been some speculations, I haven't actually seen data, but about diabetes or obesity. And so we know that some of these other health conditions or even lifestyle choices like smoking can be associated with socioeconomic status, with race, with ethnicity, even with gender. And that by having some of these other diseases, this can impact our biology, and this might impact how well we can fight or control an infection like SARS-CoV-2.
Okay. And, when we see this data coming out that actually there is pretty solid evidence that men are actually dying at higher rates than women.
Yeah.
And we start looking at some of the reasons. You mentioned a few of them. We're seeing explanations like, more men than women smoke. And certainly that's true in some countries, but not all countries. So we can't really rely on that as an answer.
Good. I agree.
Yeah. And then there are other things like, men just don't wash their hands as much.
Yeah.
And, there's just all of these kind of lifestyle and behavior things. But we also go ahead.
I just want to mention, I do think, you brought up the hand washing. I do think a lot of these behaviors obviously are very important, but I tried to make the point earlier in our discussion that we really are seeing fairly equivalent numbers of cases among men and women, meaning that we seem to be equally likely to get exposed, which for me suggests that that's evidence against the hand washing hypothesis. That if it really was that men and their poor hand washing practices, which there really are data that show that they are significantly less likely to wash their hands, and when washing are significantly less likely to use soap, if that was the cause for this sex disparity, it would show up in the numbers of cases. It would show up in exposure. And that's not where we're seeing the disparity.
Right. So we're seeing the disparity in actual people ending up in intensive care or actually then dying. So,
Absolutely.
So from a biologist perspective, I know there's some information about immunity and X chromosomes. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. I will try my best in the little bit of time that you and I have together. So, just as a general rule of thumb, women tend to mount greater immune responses to viruses than do men. And there is evidence for other viruses that this can actually lead to faster clearance of virus infection. So, you mount this robust immune response and it's greater in women as compared with men, and that leads to faster and in many cases more complete clearance of viral infections in women as compared with men. When we know this is true in humans, we've also seen this in studies using different animal models. So where we might be able to control for some of the lifestyle variabilities and comorbidity variability that you and I have been discussing. So that's kind of sometimes nice because it really allows us to hone in and focus in on the immune system and kind of get rid of all those other, if you will, confounding factors. So we do know that there are these immunological differences. We also know, and in particular from animal studies, where again, we can get a little bit more mechanistic and in terms of the kinds of laboratory types of manipulations that we can do, we know that our hormonal environment really impacts the magnitude of an immune response. So we know that, for example, in men, they have higher concentrations or higher levels of testosterone than do women. And testosterone has been shown to suppress antiviral immune responses, whereas other hormones that are found in greater levels in women, like estrogen, have actually been shown to enhance antiviral types of immune responses. So we know that our hormones can actually regulate the functioning of our immune cells and the magnitude of the immune response. So I never want to give anybody, including your listeners, this impression that we have different immune systems than our male counterparts. We don't. We have the same immune cells making the same proteins in place, but our hormonal environment can drive these cells to behave slightly differently. And in the context of a viral infection, these hormone-driven differences can significantly impact how well or how quickly we're able to clear an infection. Okay. You brought up X chromosomes. So in addition to our hormones, our sex chromosomes are thought to be pretty important in this context. And women have 2 X chromosomes. Among mammals, males have 1, so males have an X and a Y. And it does turn out that we have a lot of genes that are associated with immune function on the X chromosome. And these genes, generally speaking, we each have 1 copy from our mother and 1 copy from our father. There is a genetic system in place of what's referred to as X inactivation, and it's thought to be random. So randomly, 1 copy of each X chromosome gene should be inactivated so that we don't have greater expression of any X-linked gene than men. But we're learning that some of these immune system-related genes actually escape X inactivation. And this has been shown to result or be associated with development of autoimmune diseases in women. So why we could end up inappropriately mounting that more robust immune response that I described, but toward ourselves. And so how this could actually, while detrimental in the context of an autoimmune disease, maybe be beneficial in the context of infection, is something that I think investigators like myself would like to be exploring.
Okay, so that was a great mini biology lesson for listeners. And I do want to say, and I've had this conversation with other people, it seems like it's taken a pandemic for us to pay some attention to sex and gender differences. Do you feel that way? And do you think that this is maybe an opportunity or an opening for further research?
I 100% agree with your statement. It was very well said. And yes, in many respects, it's a shame that it takes a pandemic to put these male-female differences in immunity really onto an international stage. But I think that is what it has taken to gain some both support, but also some acceptance from the establishment. And I can't tell you how motivating it has been for someone like me who's been doing this for 25 years to finally see mainstream physician scientists asking these questions, disaggregating and partitioning their own data and publishing these observations. And how motivating it has been that more mainstream media is picking up on this, wanting to report on this, and wanting to get the public more engaged in understanding these important differences. So I do think it's taken a pandemic, but I do see some benefits moving forward as we continue, the entire world to appreciate these types of differences and how this could be used. Going back to a question you asked me that I didn't answer about how we care for and treat patients. If it does turn out that our biological responses to viral infections differ, that may provide us with some clues as to why some treatments work and others don't. Maybe they're working in some patients, not others, and maybe considering sex as one of the variables that needs to be considered in this concept of how we might personalize treatments. We can have, and you could probably list them. We've got a lot of drugs that are being considered right now as potential antivirals to help manage the COVID-19 pandemic right now. And they're not all working equally well. And in many cases, I can't help but wonder if sex is a factor that needs to be considered when evaluating whether a drug is or is not working. And so I hope this starts to really impact and become one variable. It's not the only variable, but one variable that we start considering when we evaluate treatments.
Yes, and I was going to end there, but I just feel like I have to call out that for listeners, I feel like I'd be remiss for not saying that, for years we've had clinical trials and research really pretty much exclude women from the research and from the trials. And there were lots of explanations for that and all of that. And now we've seen a push to include more women in clinical trials because essentially we've got all of these solutions that really were only tested on men. And so now we have seen a push for more women in clinical trials, but not enough. And what do you say about that?
So, you raise a very important point about the history of excluding women from clinical trials. And while, at least in the United States, Congress required a change of this in the 1990s and required that clinical trials include women. And over the past several decades, we have seen a dramatic improvement. Even most recently, when the U.S. Government Accounting Office looked at clinical trials sponsored at least by the U.S. government. So I can't speak to private funding, but those funded by the U.S. government, you're actually now seeing more women than men enrolling in clinical trials. But what we are not seeing, and what there is no accountability for, is this disaggregation and analysis of data to compare males and females. So while you can have now maybe more women enrolled, you're not going to know from that trial necessarily, did women respond better? Did women have more adverse reactions? What are the costs? What are the benefits? And how did that play out in men versus women? Because there is no accountability for that. So, I'm hopeful that maybe this pandemic starts to change that.
Okay, well said. I'm speaking with Professor Sabra Kline from Johns Hopkins University, and we'll be right back. I'm so thankful for support from Natural Awakenings Magazine in New Mexico, a monthly green, healthy lifestyle publication, and for support from High Desert Yoga, promoting optimum physical health, clarity of mind, and spiritual inspiration for all. Many of you have followed my journey from consulting to women's leadership and empowerment, starting a nonprofit, raising 2 kids, and everything in between. I've really taken some time this year to focus in on where I can help the most women with their own desire to create social impact and also a good income for themselves and their families. As my consulting and coaching practice is growing, I found that one of my favorite things to do is the free discovery sessions. I love hearing about people's passions for the work they do, sharing what I do, and helping people understand what my hybrid consulting coaching is all about. Hint, hint, serious strategy plus spacious mindset. So if you find yourself worrying about whether you'll ever make it in the thing you're pursuing, or waking up in the middle of the night anxious about money, lacking energy you need to get everything done, or procrastinating on moving forward with projects and tasks, or even if you're in a leadership role, but you're second-guessing yourself and not getting things done, I'd love to talk to you. These conversations help me get clear on how I can help more leaders create the impacts and income they want, so they can start living with ease and joy. Plus, you'll get a free hour with me to get crystal clear on what you want to create for your company or organization and your life, and what's been holding you back. So if you're interested, you can book a call at wellwomanlife.com/learn more. Okay, we're back with Professor Klein, and we're just going to do a quick segment here on more about you as a leader. It's called our Superpowers for Success segment. And so just a few quick questions. What does success in life mean for you?
Oh, goodness, that's such a deep question. I think especially as I sit in my own home in the midst of social isolation, I think success for me has meant, for me personally, figuring out that balance and where that is. It differs for each of us, but that balance between who I am as a scientist and as a professional, doing work that I am so passionate about, and how I translate that and bring that into my home as both a wife and a mother, and be a role model. I happen to have two daughters, 16 and 14, and how it is that I can be hopefully a role model to my two girls as to, how you can translate this passion that you have for the work that you do into paying it forward. So maybe how I interact with either trainees or more junior faculty in my life, how I interact with my own children, how I foster girl power, not just for my daughters, but maybe even for their friends.
Okay, great. And Professor, what personal habit do you have that you're doing daily now that really contributes to your own well-being so you can stay healthy and well and do your important work in the world?
Oh, I love that. So what I have been doing, probably more as a result of social isolation and being home during this pandemic, is exercising. And doing it as a family, which having us all make time to do things like this, and let alone do them together, that is not a typical part of an average week in my home. And so having us go on long walks or hikes with our dogs has been something that we've been doing actually several times a day. It gets me away from my computer. It gets me out breathing a little bit of fresh air, though still social distancing, and exercising every day, and not saying that I can't find time for it.
Good ones. Okay. What superpower did you discover you had only to realize it was there all the time?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, that is such a good question. Okay. So, and I hope you're editing this so that as I'm thinking out loud and not being particularly articulate. Okay. I think I have two superpowers, and I think, my first superpower that I think has helped me, continues to help me even in hard times like a pandemic, is I possess an innate ability to find humor in just about everything. And laughter and fostering that even in other people is something that I often find I do. And I think it's good. I think sometimes laughter, I am a believer that sometimes laughter can be a remedy for a lot of things. And we probably don't do that enough. And so then I think my other superpower that I think I've learned as I've moved up the ranks in my job, I think I have an inherent ability to bring people together and work together to find solutions. And I am really, really proud of that. I think, we often, our goals are often to do science for the greater good. And I think we all attempt to do that, but then it can often be wrought with competition and attempts to, make a name for yourself. And what I think one of the things that I'm most proud about is that I've been able to be successful, not just by promoting myself, but by working really well and promoting the work of other people. And I don't know, sometimes I think, I can't help but wonder, is that the female in me?
That would be another interesting sex and gender conversation.
Yes, it would. It would.
About leadership and collaboration versus competition.
Yes. So I don't know. In the midst of this pandemic, I find myself thinking about those kinds of things a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, couple last quick questions. What advice would you give your younger self, say 25 years old?
Believe in yourself. Believe in yourself, through... I'm seeing graduate students right now, even more junior faculty, who are really anxious as this pandemic is requiring them to stop research. All of us are having to stop research that's not COVID-19 related. I think it is very, very difficult to hear that, and the word that we're using, and it's a terrible word because of just the negative connotation of it, is all non-essential work must cease. And so to think of your life work or your passion as non-essential is really tough. And so what I would have told my younger self and what I'll tell, the younger listeners is just continue to have confidence, stay the course. It all works out. It really does. These bumps in the road are just that. They're bumps. It all works out. Just stay the course and believe in yourself.
Okay. Last question. Do you identify as a feminist? Yes,
I do. And here's what I'm thinking about and why I'm losing my words for you. I was one time at a conference. I was in another country. It was actually a South American country, and I was introduced as an immunofeminist. And I thought that was a very, interesting way to introduce me. I don't know that it was intended to be a kind remark, but it was a remark nonetheless. And because I study male-female differences, it's often assumed that I'm looking at this biology through the lens of a feminist. And I don't always think of it that way. I think I see these differences, and these differences are truths to me. And I think we do need to discuss them. And over time, I have found that I then use that to promote better understanding, of both women, but also men's health. But I also use this as a platform to promote women in science, women in STEM. And I've watched myself morph more and more into a feminist.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up the show. Professor Sabra Kline from Johns Hopkins University, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Giovanna, thank you so much for inviting me.
That's it for our show today. Remember, if you need support to live your Well Woman life, head over to wellwomanlife.com/Facebook to join our community. As a reminder, we are on NPR every week, so be sure to tune in at npr.org/podcasts and search for The Well Woman Show. If you enjoyed today's show, please take a moment and subscribe and leave a review. This helps raise visibility, which is super helpful when it comes to producing the show every week. For feedback, comments, or just to let me know you were listening, find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Well Woman Life. I'm Giovanna Rossi for The Well Woman Show. Until next time, have a super powerful week.